Been about 8 degrees above average, 37 a change tonight and possible storm. Sydney 26, 28 degrees in Canberra, and Melbourne 29, humidity increasing throughout the afternoon. Hobart 28, 25 degrees with rain in Adelaide, a sunny one for Perth 28, and Darwin rain and storms 31 degrees.
Now, the Minister for Resources, Energy and Northern Australia, Josh Frydenberg, joins us now from Parliament House to look forward to the parliamentary year. Josh Frydenberg, good morning.
Nice to be with you, Virginia.
Now, the government's talking points were leaked almost immediately after they hit coalition inboxes. So on a 1 to 10 Gillard-Rudd scale of disunity and division, where would you rank that act?
Look, there's been leaked talking points from both sides of politics over the years.
That's my point.
Yeah, look, it's not uncommon, and I just think, you know, the divisions of the past, and obviously we had a leadership change last year. We're all going to move on from that. We've got an election to fight this year. Malcolm Turnbull's had a fantastic start as Prime Minister. You've seen that, Virginia, reflected in the polls. He's made some very positive announcements. He's had some positive overseas trips, and now we're getting on with the job of governing in this election year.
You say we've all got to move on from that. Why can't you?
Well, I can. And
when I say you, I mean your government. Why can't your government move on from that?
Well, I dispute the premise of your question. I think we have moved on from that. I think there is...
No, that doesn't logically follow. We were just discussing the leaked talking points. You acknowledged that you'd had a difficult year, but now we have to move on from that to avoid this kind of stuff. But you haven't. Why is that?
Well, there are many people in the party room. Obviously, you know, some are probably still disgruntled, but that is not any different to what the Labor caucus is like. And, you know, I can't stop everybody, or somebody might leak some talking points, but I don't think that reflects a broader sense of disunity in the government at all. I think there is a great deal of focus in this election year. I think we're very buoyant. We're looking ahead with great confidence. Today we're talking about industrial relations and the Australian Building and Construction Commission and the importance of productivity and innovation, tax reform to the Australian economy. There's a busy agenda, and Malcolm Turnbull has the confidence of the party room and certainly has the confidence of the Australian people.
Just one more on this. Why has Malcolm Turnbull not been able to appease or at least constrain the resentment of the pro-Abbott forces? Why do you think that is?
Look, we can go back and look at the past, and you know, and that might.
No, I'm very much, Josh Frydenberg, I'm very much talking about the present. This example of the leaked talking points is a perfect example of that. Why do you think he's not been able to appease those forces?
But I don't think you'd want to make more of that than it really is, Virginia. Like I said,
I'm sure you wouldn't want me to.
Yeah, that's right. And I don't think your listeners do, because I don't think that matters to their paychecks at the end of the week, whether they can meet their mortgage bills, whether their kids get a good education, or whether their health services are right when their family gets sick. They're the things that are important to Australians and your listeners, not the internal machinations of a particular political party.
One last question on this. Do you agree with Amanda Vanstone? Should Tony Abbott go?
Look, Tony Abbott's made his decision. He's done that in consultation with his family. I respect that. He's got a major contribution still to make to public life. He's obviously very experienced. And there's room in our party for Tony Abbott. At the same time, I've said publicly he's not coming back to being Prime Minister. Malcolm Turnbull's made it very clear he's not coming back into the cabinet. And we just get on with the job of government.
So on the issue of IR reform, part of that, of course, is your strong attack on the government, on the opposition, and its leader and his link to the union movement. In those talking points, there's clear linking and targeting of Bill Shorten. Why would you do that when Bill Shorten, of course, has escaped any adverse finding by the Trade Union Royal Commissioner, Dyson Heydon?
Well, I think it's important to understand that the Royal Commission was an investigation into the lawlessness and the corruption across the union movement and the building industry, and these were findings of fact by one of Australia's most distinguished jurists. This is not about Bill Shorten. This is not about a particular union. This is about...
Yeah, just to jump in there, those talking points make it very, very clear that you need to personally link all of that to Bill Shorten, even while he was cleared by Dyson Heydon.
Look, Bill Shorten was called to account for the behaviour of the AWU, a body that he had led, and with the clean event case. There was real questions to be answered about penalty rates and the trading off of those penalty rates for workers for other benefits for the union. That has been looked at in detail by Dyson Heydon and the Royal Commission. But I think there's a broader point here, Virginia, and that is we've had this Royal Commission. It's the second of its kind. We had the Coal Royal Commission. Both have found that we need a effective cop on the beat when it comes to the construction industry, and that's the Australian Building and Construction Organisation. Now, that produced a $6 billion annual productivity dividend for the Australian economy. That's good news for jobs, and that's good news for families and for workers if you can actually have an effective cop on the beat. And what Dyson Heydon found was that there was a culture of lawlessness, which he said was widespread and deep-seated. Now, that troubles not just me, that troubles more broadly the Australian people, and that's why we need to act on these findings. That's why we're trying to bring back the ABCC.
Now, is IR reform legislation a double dissolution trigger in your view, as Michaeli Cash has suggested?
Well, if it doesn't get passed again by the Senate, then it does technically become a double dissolution trigger. But
is that the government's thinking at this stage?
I think, all options are on the table. At the same time, the Prime Minister has made clear that he wants his government to run full term, and that's his expectation. But
so can I just jump in again? Sorry to move you along so quickly,
Sure.
But what constitutes full term? What's the sense of that? Which month?
Well, I think the Prime Minister has said in the third quarter of this year is his expectation, and but these things are flexible. It is the prerogative of the Prime Minister in terms of the timing of the election. But right now, we've got a lot of legislation that we want to pass before the Parliament.
Yep.
But the ABCC is important because it does produce a better outcome for the Australian people, and it does deal with this culture of lawlessness, which one of our distinguished jurists found exists within the union movement and the broader construction sector.
Now, Scott Morrison appears to be edging closer to all but confirming an increase in the GST. Would that be part of a much broader taxation reform approach, or the GST on its own?
Look, again, there's a lot of water to go under the bridge here because we are having this conversation with the Australian people. We welcome the role that the state leaders have made, whether it's Jay Weatherill, a Labor state premier who's called for an increase in the GST, or Mike Baird, the New South Wales coalition state premier.
That must give you some comfort then, edging towards an increase in that GST.
Well, I think it's a welcome change to have a broad debate without the rule-in, rule-out scenarios early on. But the Prime Minister, again, Virginia, has made it very clear this is about getting a more efficient and effective tax system. It's not about raising taxes, because obviously people don't want that, and that's not good news for the economy either. It's about getting the tax mix right. So for the same amount of revenue that you can actually produce, what's the most efficient form of taxation? And there's growing globalisation, there's growing digitalisation. That's changing our economy, and therefore we are forced to reassess the nature of our taxation system. And do we have the right balance between income tax and company tax, whether the indirect taxes and such as the GST are very important as well. So I think there will be a broad suite of tax reforms that the Prime Minister and the Treasurer will take to the next election, but certainly that package hasn't been finalised.
And you're a new father yourself. How do you justify to yourself the Australian government potentially sending 37 babies back to Nauru, as the High Court's going to consider tomorrow?
Look, these are issues that the Immigration Minister, Peter Dutton, will have more to say about in due course, but these are very, very difficult issues.
And you all have personal responsibility and moral responsibility
Sure.
in that, given that you're all members of that government. Do you struggle justifying that to yourself personally?
Well, I tell you what really obviously upset me and upset many people were those tragic pictures that we saw over recent years of people losing their lives at sea. Now, through the strong measures that we've taken, less people have made that perilous voyage to Australia, and obviously less lives have been lost. The other thing that I am proud of as a government that we have achieved is removing kids from detention, and obviously those numbers were extremely high in previous years. We've brought that down very quickly through the good work of our immigration ministers, whether it was Scott Morrison and later Peter Dutton. But there is still some way to go, but we've achieved a dramatic reduction in the number of children. So I think there's certainly under 100 children that are still left in detention now. As far as I'm concerned, one child in detention is one child too many, but I know the government is absolutely committed to removing all children from detention.
Josh Frydenberg, we'll talk to you again soon. Thanks so much.
Nice to be with you, Virginia.
Josh Frydenberg, the Resources Minister there, speaking to us from Canberra. Now, Indigenous journalist Stan Grant has been in the spotlight recently after his speech on racism went viral just before Australia Day. And now he's revealed he might harbour some degree of political ambition. Here's what he said when asked about a possible career in politics on last night's Q&A program.
But yes, I would consider something. Is that in my thoughts? Yes, it is in my thoughts.
Federal politics?
It is in my thoughts, but but it is just a thought.
Stan, federal politics?
Federal politics, potentially advocacy, potentially staying in the media and continuing to do what I do. In some way, having an obligation to the words and honouring the words of that speech. This is a great country and my people still suffer in this country, and if I can make a contribution to that, then I think it behooves me to do that.
Stan Grant there, and he went on to say, look, there's no